Our nation is in the process of gradually returning to functioning as we did prior to the pandemic. This is largely due to the development and administering of various vaccines. Though the goal of having 70% of our population is yet to be achieved, there is still a strong desire to open the country up. To this point, Governors Hogan and Northam have lifted the COVID-19 state of emergency orders in Northern Virginia, respectively, effective July 1st. While the District of Columbia City Council voted to provide Mayor Muriel Bowser the authority to extend the public health emergency to July 25th at the latest. This is per NBC News 4 reports. However, there are still concerns and questions
Where's that go?
how to appropriately open back up. The pandemic has basically changed the way we function now. Most evident of these changes is the need for wearing masks, keeping a safe distance away from others, maintaining clean surfaces, and a greater frequency of hand washing, among other things. Furthermore, these questions and concerns are magnified for the senior population. This presentation is seeking to address some of the questions and concerns about post-pandemic functioning specific to the senior population. And it is the result of a collaborative effort led by Pazit Aviv, MSW, Village Coordinator for the Aging and Disability Services Office in the Department of Health and Human Services for Montgomery County. I'm Dana Robinson, a member of the board of the Village of Tacoma Park, and I'm your moderator for today. At this time, I want to introduce the other partners in this collaborative effort. First, I would like to introduce Kathleen Landers, LCSW, who is the owner of Sequence Counseling and Consulting Services. She is a graduate of the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, and she has worked as a clinical social worker for 3 decades. She has worked in the greater Washington area since 1994. She provides direct services to individuals and couples and oversees her group practice, as I mentioned, Sequence Counseling and Consulting Services, which with 11 therapists and 3 coaches serves individuals throughout the lifespan. The offices are located in Silver Spring and Rockville, and all services are also provided virtually. She and her associates are frequent speakers and group facilitators around topics of mental health and wellness, and have made presentations to schools, community organizations, federal and county governments, as well as the business community. Today, she will be introducing information about the emotions and stress people may be experiencing, warning signs to look out for, and coping strategies. I'm sorry I have to be like this, but has Ariane, in fact, joined us, or do we know yet? Is he?
I am not seeing her yet, and I have texted her. So let's assume that she hasn't joined unless I tell you.
Okay. I can still introduce her, but in a hopeful way. Would that be okay?
You can do that.
Yeah, and since we're going to use her PowerPoint today as well, it's
Okay. All right. So
Okay.
use her work.
So hopefully also joining us either virtually or with a stand-in would be Ariane Waxler, LCSW C from the Jewish Social Services Agency. Ariane will be reviewing some of the current information pertaining to functioning in our post-pandemic world and resources that are available to facilitate and support post-pandemic functioning. So at this point in time, I will turn it over to Kathleen. We have set it up so that each presenter will have somewhere between 20 and 30 minutes to do their presentation. And then we have reserved the last 30 minutes of this for questions and discussion. So if you wish, you can either hold your questions until the discussion time, or you can also load them up in the chat room. I believe Pazit has volunteered to keep tabs on that as well. So hopefully we can go ahead and get started.
Before we begin, I want to remind everybody to please mute yourself. I'm trying to be the police officer and mute you. So unless you intentionally plan to speak, please take the moment to mute yourself right now so that there will be no background noises, okay? Like that one.
Right. And so with that, I would like to now turn it over to Kathleen.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Dana. That was a wonderful introduction. And I am, again, Kathleen Landers. I want to say good morning to everybody, and it's just really nice to see this large group of folks here. In case you have any questions, put them in the chat. If you don't know how to use that, then do unmute yourself. I do want to make sure that nobody has a question that doesn't get asked and answered if you need to today. But let's see if we can try and go with our very organized system, which requires flexibility, and that's part of what I'm going to be talking about this morning is flexibility. And that's one of our skills of resilience. And we really need that now more than ever, along with things like a good sense of humor. So I do not have a PowerPoint presentation created. I considered how to do that, and I spent some time, and I have some old ones I was going to redo. I did not get that done by this morning. However, what I will do after today is share some of my handouts so that they can be distributed to you guys after today. And those basically are just going to be sort of a general, sort of a checklist of things to be looking out for regarding anxiety and depression and other sort of more severe degrees of mental health issues, as well as some ideas about where you can go for resources. I also kind of wanted to see what other information you were going to already be getting today, so I didn't overwhelm our systems. But so like Dana said, I'm a clinical social worker. I am a bit of a transplant here, but I've been here so long that I feel like I know this area backwards and forwards, and I've raised my family here. One of the things I wanted to share with you guys this morning is, as I'm talking about mental health and stress around the COVID pandemic and the sort of stage that we're at now with the COVID pandemic, I wanted to share a couple of personal pieces of information about me. I am pretty stressed right now. My business, I run a large group practice, and we've done a lovely job of transitioning to being all virtual. And now we're having to figure out how we're going to go back to in person. And that's putting a lot of pressure on our systems to figure out how to do that safely, when to do it. It's adding a lot of new wrinkles that kind of had gotten sort of leveled out for a while. I'm also a mother who's got one of my children getting ready to go away to college for the first time, a freshman in college. And I've just learned in the last about week or so that her roommate will not be vaccinated because the college she's going to doesn't require it. So as you can imagine, I'm having some emotional reactions to that reality. And I have, my father is in his 80s and his health is extremely poor just in the last month. And he's currently in the hospital in Tennessee, and my sister's there. And I've been out to visit him a couple of weeks ago. The last time I was talking and doing a planning meeting for this, I was there. And now I'm back and forth. And I had not seen him for, a year plus since the pandemic began because I didn't want to endanger him in any way. So when I'm thinking about this topic, I really am living it with you. And we are all in this together, trying to figure out how to cope with all of the stresses and emotions and changes that this pandemic has been bringing into our life. My field as a clinical social worker puts me in a position of talking nonstop about things like anxiety and depression, post-traumatic stress, how people are handling their lives, what they're doing, how they're coping, how they're not coping. And that's really sort of what I kind of live and breathe, and the folks around me do. And so it gives me a perspective of really kind of what are some of the ranges of reactions people are having, and what are some of the strategies that seem to be working well for them. And so, I do want to point out, I have no idea for this crowd today, what your familiarity is with mental health issues, whether you came into the pandemic already struggling in any way with any sort of level of anxiety or depression. If you did, I am sure that this last, 16, 17 months has worsened it, because that's what I'm seeing. But even folks who did not have any real struggles prior to this pandemic have suffered. We are all vulnerable to the mental health crisis that is entwined in the COVID-19 pandemic because of the tremendous changes it's brought to our lives, as well as the losses many of us have had to suffer in so many different ways. And so there's nothing abnormal about being in a place where you're struggling around any of this. And some people are going to struggle more than others. But everyone can get the help and the support they need to do much better. And so there's nothing that's sort of a done deal or written in cement or just, has to be this way. Things can get better. One of the things that our practice serves people, as young as 5 or 6 and as old as, 85 or 90. I mean, we go the range. And a lot of these issues that people are facing with mental health are ubiquitous. Everybody's got it. But there is a unique level of issues when you are an older person, because to age in our culture and to age in life is to face losses and to face change perpetually. And this pandemic has accelerated a lot of that, losses and changes. However, I'm really pretty impressed by what I've learned about the Villages program and the concept of community and support. By participating in this community, you're already doing one of the essential things to manage and support good mental health and mental functioning. And that is community, and that's not being alone, and that's seeing what other people are going through, reaching out for help and being able to offer help. So I know the community is much larger than who was able to attend today, but I'm hoping that as you learn some things and think about this topic, you can take it out even into the broader community. So again, all of the emotions that we ever have, anything that we considered mental health, are normal human emotions, just sort of writ large. They're just in larger extremes, because all of us know what it feels like to struggle with some degree of anxiety or worry. All of us know when it's natural to have some level of depression or sadness. But there are some warning signs for when these emotions have kind of gone, sort of, they've overflowed the banks of the river, and they're going over, and they're taking over too much of our lives, and they're becoming sort of entrenched. Our systems are not able to kind of get it back into the more regulated standard. So some of the things I want to point out. So anxiety is a very useful emotion to have. It helps us remember things. It helps us know what to kind of worry about, get things done. It reminds us to, oh, I need to do this, or I forgot to do that. So a small dose of anxiety in life is not a horrible thing to have. However, when we become anxious and we get sort of stuck in anxiety, our emotional reactivity has changed. We're overreacting to a threat. We're stuck in sort of a fight or flight mode. So we are going to worry about things beyond the capacity for them to actually harm us. We're going to ruminate about thoughts that we can't kind of get back out of our head. We are going to start seeing physical symptoms. When you have anxiety, you start having difficulty with sleep. Maybe it's harder to fall asleep. Maybe it's harder to stay asleep. Maybe you find yourself waking up with a sense of dread rather than feeling rested and hopeful about what is ahead for the day, but instead really not even wanting to kind of take on the burden of the day ahead. You may find yourself having gastric issues. And again, remember, all of us have some gastric issues. You may be taking medication, or you may have some other reason why you have some gastric issues. You've got to do your own kind of discerning. But our body and our mind go so intrinsically together that people do start having physical symptoms when they're struggling with anxiety. They start having diarrhea, they start having incontinence, they start having a lot of issues. These are warning signs that you're struggling. Usually, if we're interacting with people around us, they find us to be kind of too much. Anxiety is often sort of, we are overreacting, very short fuse, kind of perseverating on things, and not able to kind of calm ourselves back down. Our system has gotten very dysregulated, and we're not able to put ourselves back into a safe mental state. So that's sort of a description about anxiety. this pandemic has obviously created tremendous anxiety. You know, we all learn as children how close to stand to other people. Our teachers, our parents, our siblings will punch us if we got too close. We learn kind of the social cues of how to behave. And we've used those throughout adulthood. And gosh, this pandemic has made it so if somebody stands too close in the grocery store line, you're like, oh my God, get away from me. It has changed us. It has changed our reactions. If we see somebody not wearing a mask and we think they should be wearing a mask, it really kind of makes us very worried and feel scared and unsafe. So our body is trying to kind of keep us safe. We're worrying because we think there's a problem we need to solve. We need to be able to get ourselves back into enough of a calm state that we can really assess the level of threat accurately. So we're going to talk a little bit more about that. How do you get your system back to a place where you can understand what's a real threat and what's not a real threat? I want to speak first, though, about also depression. Depression is a very real problem, particularly as we age. There are so many cumulative losses that we experience. We lose our parents, we lose siblings, we lose friends, we retire maybe from a job we hated, but maybe from a job we love. Identity has to shift. Our beauty fades, our strength changes. There's a lot to cope with. It takes a tremendous amount of resilience and ability to kind of hold on to the best parts of yourself to tolerate some of these changes and to keep rebuilding community and keep finding ways to connect and support and be needed and to have purpose. Some of us struggle with depression because it's built into our system. It's a genetic thing that we have to carry with us, and circumstances have led to it being, becoming full blown. Like anxiety, it can be seen as something that changes our physiology. Our sleep patterns can change. Our emotional reactivity changes. Our energy level can change. Some folks present with depression as sleeping way too much. Some people can't sleep at all. It has very similar presentations of sort of being short fused. Often people don't seem sad, they seem angry. And that is a very easy diagnostic tool for depression, is when somebody's fuse is very short and they just overreact to the smallest of sort of infractions or difficulties or things not going well. And I'm not talking about the normal kind of ups and downs of the day, but really someone who's gotten sort of stuck in a sense of hopelessness and a sense that things can't get better. And again, this pandemic has brought some pretty significant changes to our world around us, our culture. We have seen 600,000 Americans die. We are now hearing about variants coming at us from wherever. We're watching, the world around us suffer in ways. And part of our conversation today was just going to even be talking within our own country. We're seeing lots of arguing and disagreements and differences of opinion. That's really hard to be exposed to on a regular basis. That will induce anxiety, that will induce levels of depression. So being able to kind of tune into yourself and your loved ones and figure out if this is getting to a point where it's becoming pervasive and damaging and something that you can't get out of on your own is really important to be doing right now. One of the topics we were going to talk about today as well, and I'm sort of throwing a lot at you, but is the concept of post-traumatic stress disorder. This could be a semester-long course to study post-traumatic stress disorder, but it's safe to say that it is a diagnosis that's given when somebody has been through some level of trauma that is sort of become embedded in a way that their body and mind react as if the trauma is still happening at the level it happened before, even when it hasn't. So sort of, again, reacting to a trigger or a cue that isn't necessarily there. If we have had a significant loss, if we have been suffering with our own health, if something very bad has happened, it doesn't necessarily become a trauma that gets stuck in this way, but it certainly can be, where you're reacting with panic about something that probably is not that dangerous, but it feels like it is because something that dangerous happened to you, or even it can have happened to someone else and you've held on to it. We are very social creatures. What happens to the people we care about happens to us. What we read about, what we see on the news, it impacts us. It doesn't mean it isn't important. If we're feeling it, we're feeling it, and our feelings are real. That doesn't mean that they have to take over. We can get help. So with that said, I want to point out, and I don't know, Dana, are you keeping track of time? How am I doing? Oh, you're muted. I can't hear you, but I'm just assuming you're telling me I'm doing great and keep talking.
I'm sorry, you're doing okay. It's about 10:25. And don't forget, I took about 5 minutes or so,
Okay.
in the opening. So
Okay.
I don't know, about 10 more minutes or so.
And
Okay.
Ariane has joined us, so we'll switch over to her when you're done.
Okay, fantastic. Now, what I want to say is when we get to the Q&A section today, if you have questions, please ask them about anxiety, about depression, about signs and symptoms, and about kind of what would this be considered that. If you don't want to share because it feels too personal, but nobody else asks a question close enough, then put something in the chat and Dana can ask it for you, okay, if you're comfortable doing that. So what do you do? What do you do if you think you have anxiety? What do you do if you think you have depression? Some of you may be very familiar with mental health treatment. Some of you may think it's a crock of you know what, or a waste of time or money. Okay, all of that is true. It is extremely helpful, and sometimes it's a waste of time and money. You've got to find what works for you. What is often a component of aging is that depression and anxiety go unrecognized. It is assumed that the feelings that are very much of a struggle are normal part of aging. There's some shame around getting help. There's some assumption it can't get any better than this. So one of the things that is very true is that in the United States, people who are older are often undertreated for mental health issues, meaning they are not getting the kind of help that their children or grandchildren may be going for the exact same symptoms. So what's also important to know is that there is nothing about being, over 65, 75, 85. There is nothing about being older that means that mental health treatment would be less effective. It is as effective at any stage of life. And by mental health treatment, I'm referring to a couple of the main biggies, which would be meeting with a primary care doctor or a psychiatrist to talk about, is there any type of medication that can help? Psychotropic medications have come so far in the last 30 to 40 years. It's phenomenal. And there are choices where there never were. Most psychotropic medication doesn't change who you are or how you feel or how you act. It simply lessens the symptoms of anxiety and depression. It simply mimics the chemistry of your own body and what your body is naturally supposed to do when you're feeling at your best, and it can restore that balance and functioning. They may have some side effects. You have to have it prescribed by a doctor to make sure that you're not taking something that would interfere if you're already struggling with issues around immune system or blood pressure or other kinds of things. But doctors know exactly what type of medication and at what dosage to recommend. And they keep an eye and they make sure it's working. So anxiety and depression both respond extremely well to medication, and in some cases for a short period of time. So I'm going to throw that out there. It is not the only treatment, however. And one of the things that I want to point out is that if you go and you meet with a therapist, they are going to talk to you. That might seem like a ridiculous way to have things get better, but the way a human brain works is that when we talk, we change. When we express our feelings and when we learn to understand them, and when we have a guide who can support us and help us and really get what's caught in here out here and help us sort it through, it actually changes how we function. And it does actually change our brain chemistry. There's been fantastic research at NIH that suggests that in many instances, when you have a severe degree of anxiety or depression, medication plus therapy is the state-of-the-art treatment. If you have mild cases of anxiety and depression, and you don't want to try medication, you try therapy first. You try talking, you find the help that way. There's some different combinations and things to think about, but there's no reason to think that you are stuck where you are and this is as good as it gets. Other things help. And given this pandemic and the isolation that people have experienced and the losses they've experienced and the constant stress that we are having to be fed all of the time, it is very important to maintain a community, to stay connected to other people where you actually talk about how you feel. You can also talk about the weather, though that make a whole nother set of feelings. You can talk about your life and your interests, but you need to also be able to talk about your inner life. So find somebody that wants to hear how you're doing, even if you're doing it through an email, that you're communicating about what's going on inside. To whatever degree that you are able to exercise, whether it's very gentle stretching and yoga, or it's going for a walk, or it's getting back in a swimming pool, lots of chlorine, really great at killing off COVID. So get in a swimming pool, do something physical, because your body and your mind are connected. I am a strong fan of mindfulness work and of meditation and learning how to regulate your breathing, because we know that changes our emotional state of mind. So when I send out some handouts and they get distributed, I'll have some of these other suggestions, but that's sort of my plug for today of some of the things to be thinking about if the stress and the losses and the cumulative effect that you've been experiencing through COVID have led to really feeling like you are dysregulated and struggling, or somebody you care about is really dysregulated and struggling with their emotional health. Okay, so I've wrapped it up, Dana.
Thank you very much. That was very helpful and very informative. So now at this point, it's my understanding that Ariane has joined us.
Yeah.
I have. I'm so sorry.
That is perfectly okay. So I would like to introduce Ariane and turn it over to her at this time.
Okay, just a question, housekeeping for Dana. Are you seeing the question in the chat box, or do you want me to read them out loud?
Oh, you can read them out loud. I don't mind.
So do you want, Kathleen, do you want to answer some questions, or do we want to wait until the end? I'm okay either way.
I was thinking because of time, it may be better to wait if we could.
Okay, I'll just keep track of them and we'll go one by one. Okay, so keep the questions going, you guys. We're not ignoring you. We're just going to take them at the end. So go ahead, Ariane.
Okay, thank you. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about physical and other ailments that have happened during COVID. COVID has actually been extremely detrimental to everyone with obesity, physical activity, and accessing medical care. Many people have struggled to maintain their weight during lockdowns, as I'm sure all of us have seen. Walking a couple feet away from the kitchen is not very helpful to keeping our weight. Older adults,
do you want to share your screen? I can share it for you.
I'd love to. I can do that. All right, give me just a second. And let me put it in presenter view, excuse me, now that you see all my notes. Give me a second, how do I view? And there we go. Oh, nope, that's not it. I'm sorry, Pazine, it might be more helpful actually if you could share it and I can look at my notes if that's possible.
Yes, I can do that.
Thank you. So, let me stop sharing then.
Yep.
Thank you. Okay. Wonderful. Okay.
Okay, hold on.
As I was saying is, now I have to get mine back up. I'm sorry. This will take me just a second. Pull this up.
Yep.
Okay, there we go. So if you'll go to the next slide.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. And then the next, perfect. Okay, so 61% of people who were interviewed by a study completed by the University of Texas Health Science Center and at Houston and UT Southwestern have admitted during COVID to stockpiling food and stress eating. That's a big problem because older adults are already at higher risk of gaining weight. as they lose 1% of muscle mass yearly. Weight gain increases can make everyone at the risk of having type 2 diabetes, heart disease, stroke, and some cancers. Additionally, many people throughout COVID have not received balanced meals because they couldn't afford it. Income loss, shutdown of food shelters or other resources where they may have been receiving food. This impact has been widespread as individuals have been cut off from family members that haven't been able to see each other. Those family members may have shopped for each other. They may have brought food, private aides possibly who went and grocery shopped. There's a lot of different ways that people have been cut off to the resources that they were having with healthy eating. Recommendations are to check in with individuals who have the need for possible meal delivery or grocery shopping. Encourage volunteers to discuss meal habits in general. It may be, you know, what did you have for breakfast? What do you normally have? What's in your kitchen? What do you like to cook? Different things like that. And I see questions coming in, which I know we're waiting till the end. So the next situation that has been very detrimental to people during COVID is physical activity. Those who were in really good routines of physical activity, at least walked from their house to the car and around the grocery store, had all of these routines and access disrupted. They couldn't do what they had been doing. Resulting from the lockdowns, 53% of people 70 years and older have either decreased or stopped their physical activity altogether. This has led to deconditioning for many, which is the loss of muscle strength and decline in the ability to perform activities of daily living like cooking, going to the bathroom, showering. And this can actually begin within days of becoming inactive. And the deconditioning leads to greater risk for falls in older adults. And that's where we get really concerned. Pre-existing conditions such as diabetes, obesity, cardiovascular disease have all been exacerbated without physical activity, and it leads to worse health. So our recommendations for that are recommending that individuals may get what's called a PERS, a personal emergency response system. All of these recommendations are going to be sent out at the end, and I have a bunch of slides of resources at the end that I can go through. But we'll give some examples of different PERS. You may have heard about Lifeline. They have a lot of commercials saying, help, I've fallen and I can't get up. It can help even in the shower, which is the most dangerous area. And when people, as I've said, have deconditioned, that can be a really dangerous area if people don't have supervision, or this can give them that fallback too, that they can call someone if they've fallen. That way they don't stay on the ground or wherever they may have fallen. Attending socialization events is very helpful to increase the movement of individuals, decrease isolation, as Kathleen spoke about. And there are a lot of different community centers with activities geared toward older adults. Some are reopening right now, actually. And so we'll talk about level of comforts a little bit. Some are having outdoor activities, but it's a good way to get outside if people feel comfortable. There are also internet platforms for older adults to engage in classes if people are not feeling comfortable coming out yet. They have different physical activities. They have different socialization events that are very helpful. And I have a resource at the end that I will show. Something that I just want to touch on quickly is older adults and independence. That's a huge topic all in its own, but being able to drive is a huge means to independence. So many older adults have not driven throughout the entire pandemic. They didn't have anywhere to go. They may not be as safe to drive now. They themselves may not feel as comfortable, or other people may see that they are not doing as well as they did when they were regularly driving. Occupational therapy can be very helpful. There are specific occupational therapists who have gotten licensures that help them with driving and helping older adults drive. There are also driving assessments through different insurances, AARP, the DMV has places also. So if you feel uncomfortable or other older adults do, there are places to go, and I have those resources at the end. Access to medical care has been in huge decline. Many adults discontinued medical care completely, whether it was routine, emergency, or urgent care. Of the 1 in 5 adults who here in the Journal of American Health Association study said that they put off care for a serious problem, 50% of those said that they had negative consequences that harmed their health or limited their ability to do daily activities. Doctors' appointments themselves actually declined by 30% during the pandemic, and often those who weren't going already had a chronic health condition. 25% of adults are still reporting that they haven't resumed normal medical care. So this is extremely detrimental. And as much as we can get people to return to seeking medical care, letting them know that the risk for COVID, obviously everyone has to make their own decision, but continuing to care for themselves and medically is extremely important, whether they can do telemedicine and that's possible for their conditions, or going back into the office wearing masks, doing different things to minimize their risks. Villages can assist with rides through county resources. We have a lot of different resources. I've talked a little bit about aids. If that's something that an older adult is interested in or is already doing, you can privately pay an aid to help take you to medical care if that's an issue, to help you with many different resources that are needed. The next topic is one where I don't think there's any easy answer, and the entire country seems to be very polarized on it. Tension between public health concerns versus civil rights. We've all seen broadcasts, we've heard discussions on the topic. It's very polarizing, but older adults actually are frequently adding additional polarization to the issue by falling in two main camps of feeling that either they are frail and they're extremely wary of sickness, and that's not just older adults who are feeling that way, or the other side is they've already survived a lot in their lives. They want to live life to the fullest for the time that they have left. And so they're ready to get out, they're ready to do. These extreme responses are due to the public having gone through a collective trauma. There are those individuals who are extremely triggered by the talk of normal because of fear, not wanting to re-enter society. And then there are those individuals that I said who feel like they've already missed out on a lot and they're ready to re-engage with others. 48% of adults feel uneasy about in-person interactions, according to the American Psychological Association. So it's pretty split. No matter what, there is a process to re-entering society that individuals need to go through to unlearn conditioned habits and recalibrate the risks of going out in the world. It actually takes 66 days for a habit to become automatic. And we've had about a year and a half of telling ourselves, the news telling us, everyone around us telling us that it's not safe to go outside. So people are going to adjust to this situation at their own pace. And a big key for the villages and all of us out there is we don't need to be anyone's therapist. No one needs to be telling other people what they should be doing and how to feel comfortable. If individuals don't feel comfortable with a village's event or different situations, and they want to discuss their issues, the first thing that we can do and the best thing that we can do is take a deep breath, because we've all felt this trauma. We've all gone through it. It's not just that one other person has gone through this trauma and has extreme feelings and intense emotions. What we can do for others is validate their feelings of trauma, such as how scary and overwhelming it is to attend events with multiple people when we haven't had these opportunities for some time. That doesn't mean to be condescending them and telling them how they have to feel or using words like, but the best thing we can do is use words like, I hear that you don't want to attend these events. Others are following CDC guidelines and feeling comfortable. It's up to you. You can also say, I felt fearful the first time I attended an event, but I saw that people stayed 6 feet away. Or I read about the rate of transmission outside. The best thing to help others and to take yourself out of that discussion is using scientific facts, such as if the event is being held outside, chances of catching COVID are massively reduced because of how the fresh air dilutes the virus. But also, it's not your responsibility to make other people feel better or to go through different situations for them. Many people feel that the CDC has been very rash with their announcements. The World Health Organization has come back and said, because of the Delta strain, it's important to wear masks inside. It's really up to each person and where they feel comfortable. Maryland has followed dropping a lot of regulations, but that's the best thing actually to, instead of going back and forth with people and saying the CDC, no, the World Health Organization, no, Maryland says this. It's best if you just say, I hear as an individual, you don't feel safe in this environment. And if you want to change anything about what other people are doing, the best situation is to talk to your local representative. Let them know that the Villages is following guidelines. Let them know that you thank them for their input, and the Villages can really stay true to their job and their mission of connecting resources, helping each person be the best version of themselves and what they need to do for themselves. My next slide is what can Villages do themselves? So Villages does a great job serving as a reliable source of information. As I just talked about a little bit, validating people's feelings, because there is no normal now. Not everyone is on the same page at the same time, but everyone's feelings are valid. We have experienced that collective trauma that I talked about, and it will affect some more than others, which is what trauma does. Villages aims to help older adults in their homes to be as healthy physically and emotionally as possible. So encouraging each individual to focus on themselves, to be physically and emotionally healthy, holistically. And Villages can really help with solutions or resources, referrals into the community. And encouraging volunteerism with Villages is really helpful, because the more volunteers, the more people, the more older adults can be helped. My next slide says, know when to get help. There are going to be a lot of older adults there are some older adults who are coming out healthy out of this situation, and there are going to be some that are coming out a lot worse because of all of the risk factors that I've talked about. Some of the warning signs of older adults needing help are a cluttered, dirty home, unattended yard could be a big sign, increased confusion if you knew the person previously, increased irritability. If they're expressing feelings of depression, this may not be something that you know, but if you notice things are expired in their kitchen, groceries in the fridge, weight loss or weight gain can be seen, trouble standing up and moving around and getting to where they need to be. Dents in the car could show that maybe the driving, as we talked about, is not as safe as it was previously. And the resource sheet at the end that I will make sure that everyone has and Pazit will send out is know where to refer people. There's a lot of different resources that we can do. So Villages is an incredible organization, but Villages also has its limits. So if there are times that the helper in the Villages feels overwhelmed or at a dead end, it's a really good point to take a step back and make a referral to either a social worker, a therapist, another community resource. We have elder care consults at JESSA, which is the organization where I work. Adult Protective Services in the county can always be called, and that is not a punishment. I know that's a whole nother talk too, but they can provide a lot of resources and referrals. And there's also, as I've talked about, aides that can help if an older adult needs a little more supervision or a little more assistance with different tasks. And then
Dana, do you I want to leave enough time for questions. Ariane, are you going to discuss resources now?
I can leave that towards the end because I know that will be sent out. So I can stop there and we can do questions. Absolutely.
I'm thinking because there's so many questions in the chat box and I want to get to them. And the resources, they're just, I'm going to just go over, there's transportation resources in Ariane's packet, shopping assistance, senior centers for activities, and the health services, and driving resources, and Lifeline, right? So just want you to know that it's there and you will get this. And if you have questions about those specific resources, you can ask them in the chat box, but I'm going to open it up for the questions if that's okay.
Sounds good. And it looks like the online senior center did not make it in there for some reason. So I will make sure that I send that to Pazit and we will send that out because it's a virtual senior center that can be very helpful.
Okay. So I'm going to ask the question, and both panelists, you can just raise your hands if you want to take that question. So the first one is, what self-care strategies can be applied as we go from isolation and masking when out to being vaccinated and masking with some anxiety moving toward normal? So self-care when you make that transition. You're both on mute.
All right. Is it okay if I jump in on that one for a second? Okay.
Yeah.
Sure.
We all have been experiencing this challenge. First, I think, again, talking about feeling anxious and feeling worried about this and feeling just the strangeness of it is very normal and very natural. We have, as it was just being discussed, gotten months and months of information about one form of behavior and about what it meant to be safe. And so to transition back out of that into kind of a different level of interaction is going to be uncomfortable. Physically and mentally, it's going to feel uncomfortable. It's going to feel weird. Just as it felt weird to walk around all of a sudden, with a mask on, it's going to feel weird if you want to take that mask off outside, as has been suggested. If you are outside and there's lots of air and you're vaccinated, that is considered scientifically to be an extremely safe situation in terms of the spread of this particular virus. And again, one of the things I've read is we all, unfortunately or fortunately, are becoming regional experts. In Montgomery County, the vaccination rates are extremely high. People have been very responsive to attending to this. And so, I'm not saying that you need to be hanging around inside people's homes that you don't know, and you don't know whether or not they've been vaccinated. And I've seen some questions about going inside restaurants or inside buildings, and I want to talk about that. But first, you just have to sort of accept kind of that, taking the deep breath, behind the mask in your own home, but really self-regulating, knowing that this is uncomfortable, that it's new, but kind of putting yourself gently out there, finding a friend that you trust, is also vaccinated, and making a plan for going out for a walk together, or making a plan to sit out on each other's backyard or patio, really enjoying the experience of being out and about and around people, and allowing yourself to kind of try it in small doses and see what it feels like. I do think that, the research is really quite strong that if others around you have also been vaccinated, the rates of transmission are so extremely low. These vaccinations are incredibly effective. And so just as if you're living with a partner, or you're living with somebody else who's vaccinated and you've been able to be together, you can come into another space with a person who's been vaccinated. But it's going to make you a little uneasy, and it's going to feel a little strange. So we, have recommended that people open windows, that people stay in well ventilated spaces. If you're at all uncomfortable, start with outdoors. It's decent enough weather to sit out somewhere in a chair with someone. But so just really self-care is sort of talking to yourself that this is kind of scary, this is sort of weird, but the science suggests that this is a safe thing, and try it in small doses, and then talk to whoever you're with or whoever you're around about the fact that this feels weird, and check in, how do they feel? And we'll realize that other people are having some of these exact same feelings. And that gives everybody kind of a chance to kind of, settle in to trying to get used to this new experience. Does anybody else have something they wanted to add to that?
Someone else brought up, they want to know, they expressed feeling and questioning why, after so much isolation that they can do it, why is it that they feel they want more isolation? They did make the point that, what's helped them is hiking in the woods, by themselves, for days. But I think the key issue is, after being isolated for so long, why the sense of wanting to continue to be isolated?
Well, I want to jump in on that one too. And again, anybody else has a better opinion. We are very social creatures. Humans are designed to be around other people. We learn from others. We emotionally react differently when we're looking at somebody's face than when we're not. When we see another human being smile, our brain has a reaction. There's so much fun if you want to study neuroscience and mirror neurons and understand how much we are, and we get a lot of joy around being with other people. However, other people are also kind of a pain in the butt, in case you've never noticed that. They're a lot of work, and we've gotten kind of used to not having to do some of that work, not having to adjust what we're doing, not having to follow schedules and meet certain people, not having to deal with other people being a bit of a disappointment or maybe talking about something that's a little boring. We've had a nice break from other people. Other people are complicated. And it may feel hard to get back, just like any other habit. It may be kind of hard to get back to that sort of being around other people, sharing your space. Some of us are much more private, or we kind of enjoy our own space and our own schedule and our own way of doing it. And it may not be always easy to be around other people. But again, it's sort of like riding a bike. In case any of y'all have ever ridden a bike, you can get back on it. And then you might actually go, oh yeah, I liked doing this. This was actually kind of fun. But you gotta kind of just sort of trust yourself and just let yourself try it. I mean, it may be that you're not gonna want to hang out with the same people you used to. You may be more selective about what you want to do or who you want to spend your time with. But I wouldn't say give it up entirely, okay? It's just part of that habit and shifting back into something. And you may be like, wow, I had, as I mentioned earlier, my father, right? I went to go visit him and sat on the plane, masked, vaccinated. That was kind of weird. But what was really nice was, and the airlines were just canceling flights left and right, thunderstorms and whatnot. So I ended up having to sit in the airport. And it was so beautiful to me just to watch all these other humans. I hadn't been in a place with that many other people in so long. And I'm like, oh yeah, they're kind of cool. And I wasn't talking to them. I was sitting with my mask very far away from them, but it was fun to see them. So allow yourself that opportunity to just try it out. Figure out some opportunity that feels relatively safe and just allow yourself to kind of remind yourself of some of the things we may have forgotten about what it feels like to be around others. That's my advice.
Okay. Ariana, did you have anything you want to add to that, or should I move on to the next question?
We can move on. I think that was perfect.
Okay, all right. Someone, and you have to bear with me while I present this, Arlene, she says after 2 years inside, due to a rare autoimmune condition, and then another year from COVID, she's reluctant to get out into the world. She is vaccinated and finding friends willing to go inside restaurants and movies and such. She thinks this is nutty. I get the feeling others think I'm being overly cautious and others are making decisions for me, which I find unacceptable. I'm an adult. Due to go to a patio dinner tomorrow night, and now friends want to eat inside without consulting me. How do I handle this? And just as a related point, Inez Atwell really underscored feeling that this is a great question. So
I'll jump in and then you can follow up, Kathleen. That's as Anise said, it's an extremely relatable question. There's a lot of people feeling on different spectrums of comfort right now. And I think that as Kathleen has spoken a lot about anxiety and re-entering, we don't want to jump into something too fast where we don't feel comfortable. It's better to slowly re-enter society step by step. So if going inside feels too fast and it's something that you think is nutty and it's not going to make you feel comfortable, my advice would be you don't have to do that this time. If you can rearrange another time to see your friends, if you can say to them, I don't feel comfortable, even if they are making that decision of, for myself, I'm okay to go in, I'm fine, everything's safe, and you don't feel that way, that's okay. You've read the science and you see that outside is much lower rates of transmission and that's where you feel comfortable, then that's okay to stay there right now and to slowly see what works for your life. And instead of just saying, okay, I can't go out with any friends, I can't do anything, see if you can say, okay, you all are going to eat inside, I don't feel comfortable there, but how about the next day? Does anyone want to go take a hike outside or actually have a patio dinner or things like that where you feel comfortable and you're not overdoing yourself too fast, and it can be a process. And I'll give it up to you, Kathleen.
Well, I agree with that. I think that sounds terrific. I think the first person I would be having a conversation with would be my doctor, because you mentioned having an autoimmune disorder. And I think, you need to be talking to your doctor to determine if you are vaccinated, what level of risk you are still at, and what do they recommend. You need to be thinking about this from your perspective. You need to make sure you have the information. If your doctor says, yes, you are at higher risk, regardless of being vaccinated, or if your doctor says, you are at this point pretty much at the same level of risk of anyone else, that's information you need. And that's true for anybody who has any medical issues or any other concerns. Ask your doctor. If you get information that says that you're, at risk, then you need to be able to communicate it to others. And if they are able to hear you and work with you, great. If they are not, then that tells you something about that type of a friendship and what they're able to do. Again, I would point out that even our friends aren't always, go back a few minutes where I said people are really complicated. People are complicated, and even our friends are going to be more complicated right now because they too have their own experiences with what's been going on, their own reactions. So it might be, like was just mentioned, you might say, I'm going to take a pass on that. You don't have to necessarily give up your friends or be super mad. They're reacting differently. They're making different choices. You can say, if you're going to include me, I'm not comfortable going inside. It has to be something outside. So let's make a different plan that can include me at some point. But trying to not lose friendships. This is not a time in life where we want to lose people that we care about because we're having a difference of opinion on this. We've got to kind of be not only patient with ourselves, but patient with others. They're going to see things differently and they're going to behave differently. It's sort of, you got to kind of let people do their own thing, tell them how you feel and what your needs are, and see if you can kind of come up with a solution down the road that's going to feel a little bit more comfortable. That's my best advice, and it's not easy advice, but and I'm sorry that you're feeling, that this conflict even has to come between you and your friends.
I'd like to,
I like that a lot. And I'm sorry, Margie.
I just wanted to chime in. I like what both of you said, and it makes me think of in the beginning of the pandemic, I was really freaked out, as was everybody. And every day I felt more and more helpless and weepy. And I, kind of got back an even keel with a lot of meditation and online groups that I never knew. I didn't know what Zoom was. Now I pretty much live in it. But my point is twofold. One, I consider myself somewhere between an introvert and a misanthrope, but I still felt so deprived and attacked when I couldn't see people. And what I realized, and it really piggybacks on what you just said, Kathleen, is it's about having the choice, having the agency. If we choose to go to that restaurant, or we choose to say, no, I'm not coming this time, see you when we can be outdoors, it's your choice. And that just makes so much difference. And having options within the pandemic has been what has made me less crazy.
That's a really good point. And we also, there may be friends, we go through different like waves of situations. Sometimes we're closer to some people, sometimes we are feeling more introverted, sometimes we're feeling more this way and more that way. And so I think it's a really good point when you were saying, Margie, is we have the choice and we don't have to be the same person on every single day. And what makes us feel the best and what we're comfortable with is what we should do. So there may be people that you're a little less close with, but they have similar feelings to you of, I want to eat outside, and it's okay to spend a little bit more time with them so that you feel like you are answering the needs that you need, whether that's your control or your feelings of safety. We don't want to make big, huge decisions, as Kathleen was saying, in time periods of crisis. We have all gone through a big trauma and crisis, and we're coming out of this somewhat. You don't want to change your life. You don't want to change all your friends. You don't want to make a huge move. You don't want to do these different things. So it's good just to make small moves, but make sure, you can write a list of, what do I need to get my needs answered every day? Is it that I need to see someone once a week, and I need to go on a hike in the woods by myself once a week, and I need to feel like I have control in this way? And so getting those needs answered in different ways is really helpful, but not making such huge black and white big jumps.
All right. I want to bring up from Steve May. He asks, aside from medication, what other things would you recommend to help deal with anxiety?
Well, I think Margie just gave a great example of meditation. It is really a wonderful tool. And actually, let me see. All right, hang on, let me grab one of my books. You know, there's some wonderful, I mean, there's just a wealth of resources out there in the world right now. This one's called The Mindful Way Through Anxiety. I think trying to work with a therapist might be helpful. I said, you know, medication can help, but therapy is extremely helpful if you can find somebody that you can have a one-on-one helpful relationship with, who could help you practice some of these techniques and sort of kind of, again, shine a light on some of the thoughts and feelings that are leading to the anxiety. There are certain types of therapy, such as cognitive behavioral therapy, where you really look at the thoughts and you try and figure out, you know, the reality of them, the impact that they're having on your feelings and what behaviors you're having. And you practice, literally practice changing your thoughts and your habits and patterns. So therapy, so mindfulness, social connection, talking to other people, checking out kind of what the reality is of the circumstances other people are experiencing. I would say a lot of the stuff that was brought up earlier about making sure that you're getting a healthy, balanced diet and some form of exercise to physically get up and move. You know, humans are designed to have anxiety because we're designed to solve problems. And we just make a problem where there isn't one if we don't have one solved. We've been sort of hit with so many problems that it's just gotten us to the point of being overwhelmed. So again, you know, having agency or having control, having something that you do that gives purpose and meaning, that you actually feel like you're helping, that you have something that to do, a more constructive problem to solve than perpetual worry, is really important. You know, that's one of the potential drawbacks of isolation, is that you also are not, you know, having a purpose. You're not connected. There's not something where you feel like you're needed and important. And we all are. We all need to be. So I would say working with someone, and I would say a therapist, and there are some coaches who will help, but trying to figure out kind of an overarching game plan. If you're trying to do a lot of things to get better and anxiety is still a struggle, then I would consider just talking to a doctor about whether or not medication was a possibility for you.
Okay, no, that's very helpful.
Yeah, I could go on, but I'm trying to think. I don't want to be redundant. Okay.
And I'll just jump in for 1 second just to add on to Kathleen for a little bit. There are, if you're not going to go to a therapist, which is the best because they're going to look at it holistically, you can also find meditation little bits on apps. If you have a smartphone, there's a lot of really good resources. If you've mastered Zoom, you can master the apps really easily. So there's Headspace, there's Calm, there's other ones that you can look up that are free and they're very good. And there's also something that I've seen really helpful for people is getting out of whatever little mileage or square footage that you've been in for COVID. We've seemed to tend to stay a lot more sedentary physically, but also in what we look at. So if you've walked the same blocks for all of COVID for the past year and a half, and for your walks, it might be really helpful to drive somewhere and walk somewhere else and see something different, get some different stimulation, like Kathleen was in the airport. That can be extremely helpful just to change what we're looking at, the same four walls, the same streets, the same people, to show that there is a world out there and it's not just us and we're not stuck in this little space. It can be very helpful.
I just want to add something. if you're not familiar with the concept of mindfulness or meditation, I just want to give a little plug that it is not the practice of sort of relaxation specifically and sort of, getting ready for bed or helping yourself necessarily wind down, but rather it's really a practice of being able to become a better observer of your own emotional state and developing techniques to sort of regulate your own emotional state. It's a way of sort of learning. It's actually, for those people who practice it on a regular basis, it actually makes them cognitively much sharper and better memory, better retention of information. It's sometimes used for folks who have attention deficit to help with focus. And so it's not necessarily, it's almost sort of like a workout for your brain that looks like not much because you're usually sitting still, but you are actually doing some exercise. There are some local organizations that you can look up online, and we can add those to our resources, that are excellent, and they have had to go online, so that in some ways they're far more accessible than they might have been otherwise. And there's the Insight Meditation Center in Washington, D.C. that has programs throughout the Washington area, including in Montgomery County. There's a wonderful organization I'm a huge fan of called Stillwater. The gentleman in charge of it is a excellent meditation trainer, and he has a number of folks that work under him. And it is, these are that one's a volunteer organization you can join. And they have meditation groups and meetings throughout Montgomery County, and they're doing a lot of it online. So, there are these resources out there. That's something that the villages can kind of include in their resource list for folks. And again, it is ways to kind of help develop habits of living as well as meditation practices to help regulate mood. Okay, sorry, that was enough.
Okay. There are a few comments I think that are important to highlight. Margie pointed out that people are entitled to their level of comfort. She points out that she's vaccinated but wears a mask to work and when with unfamiliar people inside. Roy likes, which I think this is a very excellent suggestion. He talked about how after 2 heart attacks, over the course of a few years, cardiologists recommended that he use a pedometer to register his daily movements with a recommended 5,000 steps per day. Since the pandemic, he's continued to do some. Actually, some days he's been able to double that, up to 10,000 steps a day. He says he highly recommends the use of a pedometer for anyone, especially if you're over 70. I know for myself, this particular comment really resonates. Just again, as a way of sharing some personal experience. Prior to the pandemic, I was going to the gym regularly. I was doing Pilates regularly. And after the second surge, if you will, and lockdown, I hadn't gone to the gym or anything. So I made a decision to invest in some exercise equipment for myself. But I do recognize and understand that not everyone is in that same position. But the point is that I do feel it is very important, as Ariane addressed, to maintain your physical conditioning as best you can. And walking is probably one of the most simplest ways to do that. So I think Roy's idea is an excellent one. Lots of concerns about transitioning to eating in restaurants. One person, acknowledges that it's very scary. A couple of people actually acknowledge that it's very scary. So again, this is an area of concern, and I would highlight, even for myself, again, as I said in the opening remarks, that Governors Hogan and Northam have lifted the emergency, the COVID-19 states of emergency in their respective states. So which means they're saying, people can now be out and about without masks at all. Other than the businesses still want to set up their own regulations around people being masked coming into their places and so forth. They're well within their rights to do so. But he feels because of the rate of vaccinations in the state, and the declining number of cases, that, he feels confident saying, okay, we can really open up. But that's still, for me at least, that's still scary. That's a big leap of faith at this point in time. Did anyone else? One person said, my doctor prefers not to eat inside, that they not eat inside. She's told her friends that, but they're ignoring her. Which again, I think is an issue. And I will kind of go back to Margie's comment about everyone needs to establish their own comfort level about things. And not feel ashamed about it, as far as I'm concerned. If for whatever reason you don't want to go into a restaurant and your friends, so to speak, chide you gently or otherwise, you just say to them, listen, if you're okay with going in there, go right ahead. However, I'm just not at that point yet. And I don't think there's anything wrong in being assertive in that manner. Actually, I think it's very healthy, to be very honest. A lot of people asking for a handout. Some other suggestions are doing manual things like baking, pottery, gardening. They both produce something and benefits us by sending neurotransmitters to brain to release endorphins. That's Margie. Handouts again, handouts. Oh, someone points out, please note that a number of villages offer regular weekly led meditations by Zoom for their members. The Insight Timer Meditation app has been a lifesaver for Corey. November 2016, utilized some guided meditations on teeth and dental visits yesterday before my first dentist visit since the pandemic. Arlene says, we made a patio reservation and now they want to eat inside. I guess I could eat on the patio and let them go inside, but that defeats the purpose of being together. These are really legitimate quandaries. Someone asked, can you explain what the villages are? Prazeet, would you like to take that away?
Okay. So this is a village event. We didn't expect the question, but we will answer that nonetheless. So villages who are mostly represented here are grassroots volunteer-led community organizations that create local social connections and networks so that people can age at home with high quality of life and self-determination and joy in their lives. And they organize themselves with social and educational activities, as well as volunteers, neighbors, helping neighbors, type of help, such as rides or meal cooking if you're sick at home, or simple home maintenance or tech support. It depends on the village. And every village is different. So Sharon, you're seeing lots of people here today that are coming from very different parts of like Montgomery County, but I've seen some people from Prince George's and other parts of the nation. I've seen some people from, I don't know, Rhode Island, I think I've seen in DC and Virginia. So people have their own villages in all parts of the country. So Sharon, if you're interested in learning more, please contact me. I will put my email in the chat box. Also wanted to make sure that when you say you want the handouts, I do not have your email specifically. We didn't require registration, which means I don't have your email. We're keeping it very low key. So if you are interested in handouts, you need to specifically put your email in the chat box. And no, you will not get shared with everybody in the recording. The chat box is shared separately with me. So fear not, stick your emails there. You will only get a handout from me and nothing else. I'm going to just use the time that I actually have my mic, because I think as lots of the people here are village leaders and you're kind of taking a lot in, and the question is, what do you do with that information when you go back to your own village? Some of the recommendations have been given by the handout, which you will get. Some of them were just shared in speaking. And I think that the biggest takeout from what I'm hearing today is that villages need to be compassionately accepting everybody where they are, and that you're going to get a whole spectrum of feelings, thoughts, and emotions and attitudes, and that it is important you communicate understanding of that rather than an expectation of somebody aligning themselves with other people's level of comfort or needs. And so, I mean, the beauty of your village is that you can create different groups around their level of comfort or the kind of things they want to do. And so even opening the conversation and say, we're going to have a tier system. Tier 1 are for people who are very risk averse, do not want to experience anything other than, you know, meeting outside 6 feet apart, or even not that, just meet me in Zoom. And then the tier 4, I'm just throwing ideas out there, are people who are, you know, ready to jump in with embracing life back to normal as they were, and just create the spaces for people to feel that they're normal, that nothing about what they do is not okay, and that we want to normalize the experiences everybody has. So I'm going to hand it back to you, Dana.
Okay. At this point, there are no other questions or comments, at least in the chat box.
Patricia,
but I will open it up.
Dana, Patricia has a question.
Okay, Patricia.
I'm getting myself unmuted here. I have a Kindle and not a computer. It's just hard to type in the chat.
That's fine.
So 2 comments. One of them is everything that you hear about eating outside and being outside without a mask is just about as close to being completely safe as you can get. And I'm beginning to feel pretty okay with all that. So I have made progress. But then they also say, well, it's not as safe to be inside. And that implies that it's not 100% safe. So it's not completely a matter of your level of comfort. It's what they're actually saying. Mm-hmm. It's not 100%. That's just the truth. And it's kind of like making people feel like they're overcautious if they're going with the best practice, because the authorities are anxious to get you back to normal for business's sake, and I understand that. But they're not saying it's perfect to be inside. They're saying it's pretty safe. So let's lighten up on people and not say that they're being overcautious or sound like it. And along with that, the other thing, and this is the really big plea, it's good for people like here to be saying everybody has their own level of comfort and we should respect that. But if you're talking to a friend one-on-one or to a group that you're trying to persuade to do it the more safe way outside, and one of them says, well, everyone has their own level of comfort, that is going to sound pretty darn dismissive of your feelings and a put down a lot of times. And I think we should be careful not to say that in personal conversations. Well, everyone has their level of comfort. It would be so much nicer and make them feel better if they said, oh yeah, the whole thing is pretty scary and I totally understand. That would just be nicer.
So I'm going to respond, Patricia, for just a second. I will say that my understanding, and this is where the conversations can get a little bit challenging, but my understanding is that it is very safe to be inside if you know the other person, if they've been vaccinated, if you have 2 vaccinated adults who are in a space, and the difference of indoors versus outdoors, I joke, it's kind of like, you know, the good old days or the bad old days, however you want to look at it, when people used to smoke. If you're smoking a cigarette and you're breathing that air out and you're outdoors, it dissipates, right? If you're in a room with somebody and they're smoking a cigarette, pretty soon you're smoking that cigarette too, right? So when we're in an indoor space that's not ventilated, we're breathing and sharing that same air. the vaccination is very effective at not only preventing us from being getting the disease in our body, but it is very good at preventing us from spreading the disease out of our body. So the bigger issue, I think, is when we're around people who are unable to be vaccinated, small children, some people with medical conditions who can't get vaccinated even if they wanted to. Also, when you're in a restaurant or a public space indoors, you don't know that everybody's been vaccinated. You're sharing a lot of air. You're not sharing it in the first 5 minutes, but if somebody's in a restaurant smoking, within about 20 minutes, you got that smoke too. So it's that ventilated space and that knowledge of people's vaccination. And so you take that with a grain of salt. That's sort of where the science seems to be right now. And I've gotten that information from friends who are in the medical profession and family members who are doctors. And so, but I also hear you. There's kind of different ways to try and talk when, this is all too about our talent to talk about disagreeing with people and how people disagree with each other and what's considered the polite way to disagree that's not offensive but honest and authentic. Everybody's got to figure out their own sort of style of, and how to be kind about something that may have very strong emotions attached to it. And so any suggestions that anybody ever makes about what's a better way to say it is great suggestion. And it's always worth kind of thinking about, how am I saying it? How's my delivery? Are people able, I'm not trying to offend everybody or put everybody on the defensive that they have to defend themselves or that I'm sitting in judgment of how they're doing it. And I think that's part of what we're trying to talk about is, not judging one another, letting everybody try and figure this out in whatever way is the most comfortable for them. Yeah.
I'm going to jump in here because we have just about 3 minutes left. I did want to respond to Patricia in as much because I think she raised a really good point. And this is a point about information. So there's information out here. There's also messaging, mixed messaging. So to give you an example, I heard from CDC one recommendation about masks and mask wearing. I heard from the World Health Organization a contrary recommendation. But my point is you really want to try and stay on top of the information and have as much information as you can, which enables you potentially to make better decisions for yourself. And I just think that's a very wise, prudent thing to do. The other thing, just kind of as a more humor, to try and end on a more humorous note, at least what I find is humorous. Arlene offered the comment that Dr. Fauci is not eating inside restaurants yet. So I would potentially end on that note, but is there anything or anyone else wants to say at this point in time, or I mean, anyone, including our presenters or Pazit?
I want to give maybe Kathleen and Ariane share some last thoughts that you want to leave people with.
Go ahead, Kathleen.
You guys are doing wonderful work. You're paying attention. You're trying to figure this out and you're trying to support others as they go through this. And I think that's just the most important thing is, staying part of a community means, being patient with yourself, being patient with others, and trying to get the most information possible. Always asking kind of that next question. Trying to not panic, trying to stay in a place where you're kind of thoughtfully really considering the data. For example, now I need to go figure out how often Fauci went to restaurants before the pandemic, because I don't know. So we just need to kind of take it gently with each other. I love a lot of the stuff about kind of the cues and things to be looking out for with other people. Hopefully today gave you some ideas about how to take care of yourself, when you need to take care of yourself, how to know that all of this is so normal, and how to keep an eye out and help take care of others around you. That's what I have to say.
Well, That's amazing, Kathleen, and thank you all for listening today and asking such good questions. I think that there's a lot of uncertainty, a lot of questions, a lot of anxiety, and as a lot of people have commented and said, it needs validation. We shouldn't be dismissing each other. We shouldn't be minimizing our feelings. There's a lot of strong emotions that come from trauma, and we have all gone through that collective trauma. Kathleen is a really good resource if you need therapy. There's a lot of resources coming your way. And Jessa also is a great resource for senior services, older adults, anything that you need. And the Montgomery County has a lot of resources also that's included in the resources that are coming out. So reach out, ask questions. A lot of us are feeling the same ways. Even if you feel like you're getting siloed into people that are ready to jump into restaurants or this or that, there's a lot of people that aren't. And as it was said, 48% of adults are really afraid to go back to normal life. So it is split half and half. You can find whichever side you're feeling, and it helps to be able to talk through all of this. So thank you, everyone.
Okay, well, I would like to thank our presenters, Kathleen and Ariane, for all the useful and helpful information today. I would also really like to thank Bazit for pulling all of this together. I think it's been a pretty Herculean effort on her part, and it's just an incredible service. And so I think with that, we want to bring it to a close. Bazit, anything?
Yeah, thank you so very much for this. I've gotten lots of good feedback from you all, and until next time.
Okay.
Thank you all.
Okay, thank all of you.